Okay, on the show today, Victoria Kleinsman. So Victoria is a food freedom and body love coach. We've actually had a few chats offline, so looking forward to catching up today. Victoria, welcome.
Thank you, Mark. I'm excited for the conversation.
How did you get interested in working with the food and this slightly deeper approach that you use than many people?
Well, a long story short, it's mainly through my own experience. So I started dieting at the age of 9. Even though I wasn't in a larger body, it wasn't like I, quote, needed to in terms of what society would think of me. But I followed whatever my mum did. So I did that too. And then when I was 13, I was diagnosed with anorexia nervosa. And so that was a difficult time. When I was 19, I fell into a very abusive relationship where I actually turned to food as my friend, as my savior. And then I was diagnosed with binge eating disorder. And then 6 years after that relationship, the relationship was 6 years. So after that, I found the gym, became obsessed with that. And then I was diagnosed with bulimia because I was in the starvation, binge, purge cycle. And I lived like that until I was 30 years old. So that's only 5 years ago now. And then when I was 30, I met my now fiance and he introduced me to personal development. And then through that, through studying psychology and being certified and then certified in coaching and nutrition, having my own coaches, I finally can say that I am normal around food, whatever that even means.
Normal is not really normal, is it? Because as you say, like, dieting from 9 years old, and I don't know what the figures are, but it seems like everyone's on a diet most of the time, or some sort of restricted eating, if they don't call it a diet, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's so common.
And that's sad, isn't it? Because if you look up the word disordered in the dictionary, and I haven't got it in front of me, so I won't try and butcher it, but it basically says something like anything that is not natural or that is not homeostasis, right? And so most people, unfortunately, in my opinion, if they're dieting, therefore ignoring their body's natural signals, they're actually in disordered eating. There is a difference between an eating disorder and disordered eating, but most of us are ignoring our bodies, following a meal plan or points or whatever that may be, thinking we're being, quote, healthy, but that's actually far from it. We're trying to manipulate our bodies, which again, we actually can't do unless you stay in a restrictive eating disorder for the rest of your life.
Right. And my trainer at the gym said oh, here's an app and you just have to measure everything you eat and record it on an app. And I was like, oh, that's kind of extreme. I'm not sure I want to do that. You know what I mean? And actually another person I've been working with, I've got a bit of stomach problem at the moment. He said, oh, send me your information. He just sort of assumed that I was recording everything I eat. Mm-hmm. And I was like, wow, okay, this could be helpful. I'm not saying it's, always a bad thing, but I was like, that would have been considered odd not long ago. And certainly the idea of being on a diet was something at a certain point was sort of strange. Like, I'm kind of wondering how it started, like historically, that this became a normal thing to kind of impose on ourselves.
Well, historically, it comes from a lot of social class justice type things in terms of back in the day, a few hundred years ago, being fat was actually celebrated and worshipped because it was very difficult to be fat because there wasn't enough food around. If you had money, if you were very wealthy, you could then afford food and therefore you would get fatter. And so people strive to be fat. Obviously, times change, like sugar is now abundant, food is now abundant. Therefore, it's harder to get, quote, thin. And of course, people make money out of this. So whatever's the hardest to obtain, that's what we strive to do because of the way society is built. And there's also a women's oppression built in with this as well. And whether you believe this or not, in terms of like women keeping themselves occupied with what they're eating and how thin their waist is, like that takes up a lot
of energy, right? A lot of energy, right? And difficult to sort of be kind of successful in the world in other ways if so much mental energy is going into that. So I can definitely see that. It's interesting when we sort of try and do the opposite. And as you say, huge cultural piece. I've lived in African countries where, I came back after being away and people were like, oh, Mark, you got so fat. They were like telling me that. I was like, okay, thanks. And I could see it was as a compliment to them. And as you say, historical periods, only the wealthy could be big, whatever it is. All right, there's sort of a counter argument here in a way that we have this evolutionary past where maybe food wasn't so abundant. Like you mentioned that, like, if I go into a shop in Brighton, almost any shop to buy many things, so I want to buy some sellotape, I go into the corner shop and I'm just surrounded by high fat, high sugar foods, right?
Yeah.
Like they are. And if I walk out of my house just to go to my gym, I have to walk past a sausage stand, a waffle stand, a burger stand, and at least 10 restaurants between my house and the gym.
Yeah.
That's not a sort of neutral environment. It's probably not the one we evolved in. So is there some argument that maybe we've evolved for overeating in the current context, so some restriction might be helpful because it's not the evolutionary context we evolved in?
Great question. And I love that you brought this up, because the answer to this is both yes and no, meaning the world that we live in does exist. We are blessed enough to be able to go and buy sellotape, very random example.
I think of something I'd buy from the corner shop that wasn't food, you know. So.
We are blessed to be able to do those things and to have these opportunities. So we can see it as a blessing. However, you're right, back in the day, we didn't have access to all of this stuff. So part of it is facing the reality and the abundance that we live in. And therefore we have a choice. Realistically, do we want to live in a world where either we don't give ourselves access to that, meaning we're going to move in the middle of nowhere and grow our own shit, or deprive ourselves every time we have the opportunity when we want something? Now, here's my argument. Depriving ourselves doesn't actually work long time, because if you want to feel like you're addicted to something in terms of being obsessed with food and sugar, because you cannot be addicted to sugar, and we can talk about all the experiments done on rats for sure to go into that. But the best way to feel obsessed or addicted about something is to deny yourself from having it if it's available in your environment, and to make yourself wrong when you do eventually give in and have it because it's in your environment. Now, in terms of our natural set point weight, there's two major key
Hang on. You're jumping through a bunch of stuff and I want to kind of chew on each one. Let's digest, as it were, what we're saying here. So what you're saying. So first one is, if we deprive ourselves of something, we want it more.
Yep. And is that true for you in your life, would you say?
I think for many people that's true. And there's also things that I've chosen not to do, like I've chosen not to drink because I'm an alcoholic, and I don't obsess about that. You know, I went through maybe a period of obsessing about it. And then after a few months, I was just like, okay, this is just something I don't do. Like when I was a vegetarian, I didn't have meat obsession or craving.
It depends. I'm glad you brought this up, because dieting isn't an action, it's a state of mind, meaning if you became a vegetarian because of ethical reasons, or in fact, let me ask you, why was you a vegetarian at some point?
Yeah, I made a decision, I guess, for ethical reasons was a decision, and I kind of reassessed it kind of after 10 years. So I was a vegetarian for quite some time as well. Yeah.
So your motivation, your inspiration, your reason for not eating meat isn't restrictive, because you're not being like, oh, I'm a bad person if I eat meat, I shouldn't eat meat, because most people diet because they're trying to get their body smaller.
Yeah.
So any choice from a place of trying to make your body smaller isn't going to work long term. Whereas if you imagine, like when you was an alcoholic, right? First of all, you don't need alcohol to survive, you need food to survive. When did you feel a compulsion to have the alcohol? You felt like it wasn't a choice.
Yes, it was compulsive drinking.
Right. So if people, especially the women that I work with, they're in the diet binge cycle, they will tell you that they will feel almost like a compulsion to binge eat on the things that they've tried to not let themselves have for however many weeks, days, months.
Right. So just, again, slow down a little bit. The diet binge cycle, so someone restrict something, say, right, I'm not going to eat sugar, I'm not going to eat sweets, cakes, sugary drinks, whatever. And then at a certain point, they sort of the willpower dam cracks, because we've only got so much willpower and people are busy and tired and all the rest of it. And then they binge on something. And I have seen myself do that at times with food, for sure. And as you say, there's an emotional piece here too, right? Like I was going for a bit of a downstage not long ago, and I was definitely eating more sugary foods in the evening. Yeah. And it was like very tired from long days at work, needed that little hit. It's quick and easy to grab. much easier than most things, like, I don't know, sex would be another one, but it's a whole other person's involved in that, it's much more complicated. Food's a much simpler thing. You don't have to chat a Mars bar up, and you can put that in your book.
It's a good one. I like that. I'm taking it.
The chat a Mars bar up. This seems to be fairly common though, but not necessarily super healthy. Like when I find myself eating in a sort of mildly compulsive way. So there's a spectrum here, right? Like there's people who are hardcore bulimic, and there's kind of me down this end of the spectrum. So what's the solution there? I mean, is it just sort of eat what you feel like when you feel like?
Yeah, so what you've described as emotional eating, binge eating is different. So I think it's important to just distinguish the two. So binge eating is a reaction to any form of restriction, meaning like when you feel that compulsion to eat something, almost like you haven't got a choice anymore. Even though you'll beat yourself up after you've made the quote choice and ate the food, you'll feel bad. The compulsion is because your biology is fighting against the restriction. That's what binge eating is. So that's almost inevitable if you're restricting. Emotional eating, on the other hand, is a choice in a way, but there's been countless studies done by this, especially by Linda Bacon. Those that have dieted in the past turn to food for comfort. If you find a non-dieter, most of them, and I can't think of the percentages here, don't use food for comfort. They'll use sex or drugs or something else because we're human. And so emotional eating is eating to change your emotional state and for comfort and all of that. But when we try to stop ourselves from eating emotionally, the whole concept of we want what we can't have comes into play. So with emotional eating, I would say to you, if you was a client of mine, I want you to write down like a little self-love menu that's realistic and practical, that you could actually choose in the moment when you want some comfort and you want some pleasure. Food is also going to have to be on there, because the second you don't allow food to be an option, you're going to compulsively have it. So it needs to be a choice from allowance and abundance of other things to choose from.
Okay, so like last night, I had a difficult day at work yesterday. I'm a bit unwell as well, but I went kind of dancing last night. And I noticed my eating was completely healthy afterwards, because I kind of had a de-stress. I'd moved my body. I'd got in touch with myself. I'd been around some people I know who I'm friendly with, had a hug, and all those good things. Listened to good music, had a rest, rolled around on the floor, and didn't overdo it because I've been a bit unwell. But I was like, oh, okay. And then I noticed I went home and ate a meal and stopped eating when I was no longer hungry, and kind of didn't feel the need to eat anything else. So I guess that's an example of that, right? There's something else on the list there.
Exactly. And why do you think that was? Why do you think that you didn't come home and then just automatically choose to emotional eat?
Well, because I'd had those needs met. I'd found another way to de-stress, to connect, to, do the other things in different ways. So, okay, that makes total sense to me. And I do sometimes give that to my coaching clients as well, like alternatives to the thing they're doing, which is meeting needs. And, there's no point judging and blaming people for it, right? Because that just makes it worse. You get a kind of a worse cycle if you do that.
Exactly. And I have a question for you around that, if you don't mind. Do you think, and again, obviously we don't know, it's just a thought, do you think that if you had said to yourself all day yesterday, I am not going to eat emotionally, like I'm not allowed to use my favorite food to soothe me, I'm just not doing it because I'm a bad person, blah, blah, blah. Do you think you were more likely to then actually turn to the food, or less likely to turn to the food?
Yeah, makes sense. I think that there's a limit to how much people can use willpower to not do something. And then the dam breaks at a certain point. And for me, it's when I'm just tired, like in the evenings, for example. So I can restrict during the day, but then at a certain point, I'll just be exhausted from work or whatever it is. And I just like, bugger this. And then I've also learned that if I kind of beat myself up at that point, that really doesn't help.
It doesn't. We think it does, which is why we do it. So the secondary gain in psychology of us beating ourselves up, we think it's going to stop us from doing the thing. But actually, it has the opposite effect.
Yeah, that's my experience too. And you mentioned sugar not being addictive. So as someone who's been addicted to proper drugs, I've also had my doubts about people saying they're addicted to sugar. Though I also do see that it's kind of moreish. Like, I notice when I have sugar, I want more. Like, if I'm on a retreat center that doesn't have sweets and things around, that's kind of a relief because I'm not constantly seeing them. It's just nice to have, 3 meals a day and not think about it the rest of the time when it's like, so, somewhere like a center where there isn't food constantly in your face, like if there is in town here. But I also noticed that my urge for sugar kind of goes down. So is there some addictive component to it or compulsive? Like, what's your sense of that?
So with what you've described at the retreat, you didn't have a choice to eat sugar because it wasn't available to you in your environment, correct?
Right, but I wasn't really thinking about it or...
Because you wasn't restricting it because you didn't have a choice.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say you were at the retreat, there was all this healthy, nourishing food around, and there was a corner shop wherever you were full of like Mars bars and things like that. What do you think would have happened then in your mind?
All right. So that might be different in the sense that I'd be kind of, as you say, restricting. But isn't there this second issue that when and I think other people have sugar, they also want more sugar afterwards? Like, you kind of get out of the habit of it and then it tastes super sickly sweet afterwards if you've ever had a week or two without any chocolate, and then you have some and you're like, oh my God, this is like feels very strong.
Exactly. And again, you have such amazing questions. When you eat sugar, something happens in your brain, like the pleasure centers are lit up. So there's no denying that. I mean, people are paid millions of dollars to make food as, quote, let's use the word moreish, not addictive, as tasty as possible, right?
Yeah.
There is an element to this. However, the brain centers light up in the same place if you were to make love and have sex, cuddle a puppy, listen to music. So just because the pleasure centers light up in your brain when you do eat something delicious like chocolate or sugar, the same thing also happens when you do something else pleasurable. Now, this brings into the context of allowance creates space for choice, because if you was to decide, okay, sugar is, quote, bad for me, I don't want to become obsessed with it, etc., then cut it out of your life, you might stop craving sugar if you can stop yourself from eating it for a set amount of time. But then it comes back to surrendering to the environment we're in. Do you want to live a life where you're not enjoying the foods that have been made that taste delicious? And the only way to have a balanced relationship with that is to allow yourself, be mindful when you're eating it so you can get the full pleasure from that. And you will notice over time, the more you eat of that thing, this is why it's not like an addiction model. The more, like, for example, myself, I genuinely thought I was addicted to chocolate. Like, I read all the books. I was like,
yeah.
Hey, my name's Victoria, I'm addicted to chocolate. The more I allowed chocolate from a place of allowance, not thinking I'm going to binge and then diet tomorrow, because that's still restriction and reaction. The more I allowed it, the less I wanted of it over time. Whereas an addiction model, I'm sure you know, the more you have of it, the more you keep wanting more.
Yeah, that makes sense. My mum actually worked in a Cadbury's cream egg factory. And it's very interesting what they do there. They say, eat as many as you want. And at first, for those who don't know, Cadbury's cream eggs from abroad, this is a sort of delicious, very sugary treat, chocolate with sort of goo inside, and kids normally love them. You get them at Easter, and because they're often only at certain times of year, people often particularly like them. And she was in the factory as a student job in Birmingham. And, the first day she probably ate 10. And the second day she might have ate 7. And she said by 2 weeks later, she said she didn't want to eat one. She never ate another one in her life after 2 weeks of working there. Because they didn't restrict them at all. They just said, eat what you want. And then people naturally just went, this is a bit too sugary, and sort of stopped eating them.
Can you imagine if she'd gone into, and by the way, I just want to give a little completely out of context share. I did a Cadbury's cream egg eating competition one time when I was in my binging days, and I ate 25 cream eggs in one go.
No man can eat 25 cream eggs. It's like, you're like the Cool Hand Luke of chocolate.
I did that. I couldn't do it now because I'm not restricting. So my body was literally like, yeah, give me the sugar. So anyway, imagine if she had gone into the working at Cadbury's cream egg and was in the diet binge cycle and said to herself, I am not allowing myself to have any cream eggs.
Yeah. By then she'd be craving one for sure. Yeah.
Should most likely, you said she went in and at 10, for example, the first day. What would most likely happen is she'd probably manage to resist for 2 days, and then she'd probably eat 20 in one go, feel shit about herself, and therefore the cycle continues and it would never end.
And is there such a thing as healthy eating then? Because, you know, people have this idea I'm supposed to eat vegetables and green stuff and less fat, less sugar. And, you know, sometimes it changes what we're being told. You know, like we used to be told fat is bad, and now we're being told fat is okay and sugar's the devil. And I mean, some changes kind of over time, but there's maybe some sense like, hey, some of these things that are overly available, that are moreish, that are, you know, in our environment in a way they weren't in the past. Maybe cutting down on those is a good idea without going crazy about it, and maybe eating a few more vegetables than you necessarily would just generally feel like is there such a thing as healthy eating?
Yes, because allowance creates space for choice, meaning when you continue to allow all the foods that you've had previously banned or off your diet, you will most likely go through what I call the honeymoon stage of eating, where you literally are kind of been given this permission slip to eat the Mars bars, like as much as you want. You probably eat a lot of them, but then over time, through your mum's example with the cream egg factory, you genuinely won't want something. So if you have a desire for something and you try to restrict that desire, you're going to want it more. If you have a desire and keep allowing it, you'll desire it less over time. So when you've been through the honeymoon period, we start to focus then at health at every size. And this is a weight neutral way of like seeing yourself, nourishing yourself. So on the table of choice, like pun intended, let's say today is the morning I've not eaten yet because I feel better when I'm like on an empty stomach doing an interview. On that table of choice this morning, when I woke up, I was like, right, so if I want to eat something, on the table of choice is digestion, energy, how it's going to feel in my physical body, blood sugar, etc. What isn't on the table of choice is this going to make me thinner? And so we want to choose naturally. Our bodies want to be healthy, like especially if you're embodied in your body wants to move, it wants to feel good, it wants to feel vibrant. So if you allow your body to choose, you're going to want to naturally eat vegetables, but not if you force yourself. So there's a quote that I like to use. When I stopped making vegetables and exercise feel like punishment, I started to crave them.
Yeah, I've had this when I've been abroad and I've been eating in restaurants for a few days.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, steak and chips, Chinese, Indian steak and chips again. And then after a few days, I'm just like, I could kill a salad. You know, and I'm like, whoa, what's going on? You know? And
because your body's talking and you're allowing your body to talk. And when we get out of our own way and allow our body to just like run the show, our instincts run the show, you are going to want to eat a quote healthy, balanced diet because that's your natural state of your body. It wants to feel good.
And there is, this is about tuning in, isn't it, really, as well? Because like I know when I'm really like, and to me, it's almost like there's layers of it. Sometimes I'm like, oh, I want that sugary drink. And then I just kind of, without denying it, I just tune in a little bit more and go, well, do I really? You know, like there's a say, like if it's allowable, as you say, but there's that like slightly deeper tuning in than just the initial, what do I feel like, which is often something that probably is a bit trashy.
Yeah, and that's what that you've shared there is so beautiful because it's showing you that from a place of allowance, from a place of the drink is there, should I so want to have it? Do I actually want to have it? Because I'm not going to make myself wrong if I do have it. That's the magic of this work. You can then make a choice that doesn't feel compulsive. Whereas if you were told yourself you can't have fizzy drinks for however long, the fizzy drink opportunity comes along, you're most likely going to feel like a compulsive thing to need to have it. You've got almost like you've got no choice then.
Yeah, yeah. And do people sort of do this a little bit, or does it have to be full on? Like if you go, you know what? Just gonna tune into myself and eat what I really want, or because there's still a lot of little ways it goes in. Like I wouldn't start as dieting, but for example, I got in the habit of fasting. That's quite a sort of common health thing, and now I just don't feel like food in the mornings, for example. So it's just become kind of normal. Like I haven't eaten today, and I'm not sitting here hungry, even though we're talking about food, you know. Or some people go, you know what? I'm just gonna cut out that one thing. Like how hardcore are you about this?
It all depends on, again, the same quote that I said before, dieting isn't an action, it's a state of mind. So if it feels restrictive for you, then likely it's not going to work for you. If you choose, like I have chosen not to eat yet today because I feel better and I have more clarity to speak when I've not eaten. Obviously, if this was in the afternoon, of course I would have eaten because I'm caring about my body. If it's a choice, it's not going to have that reaction. So everything comes down to your motivation. If someone decided to go paleo tomorrow, depending on their reasons, it might not be restrictive for them. I can eat 2 tubs of Ben & Jerry's and not be binging. And I can also eat salad and drink green shakes for a week and not be dieting, because it's what's going on up here.
So sorry, help me get a distinction. So let's say someone says, right, I've done some research and I'm going to go paleo because I think that's the best for my health. They're not restricting?
It depends how it feels to them. Everyone's individual. So I eat mainly plant-based because it just, over time, when I was in this food freedom journey, and I've been in it for just under 5 years now, I naturally gravitated away from meat. It wasn't a choice. My body just guided me. So when people are making decisions like I want to be paleo or however you say it, it's that why.
Yeah. And sometimes feel things sort of more imposed, don't they? And less kind of organic, less kind of bottom up, or, top down versus bottom up, really, isn't it? Like, okay, right now, I'm not hungry right now. But it would actually be really disembodied for me to force a breakfast in me. That's kind of like, yuck, it's not there. But other days, I'm very loose with the fasting. Like some days I'm like, actually, I'm kind of hungry. I'm going to have a banana or a protein shake in the morning, and don't, kind of keep a flexibility to it so it doesn't feel too imposed.
It's like you obviously have a very good relationship with your body. You're very connected to your body. I like to ask clients, if it's difficult for them to imagine having a relationship with their bodies, to imagine their bodies as the 6 or 7-year-old version of themselves. And so if the 6-year-old version of themselves, aka their body, was like, hey, excuse me, I'm hungry, what would you do? Would you be like, well, shut up, bitch, you're not allowed to eat until this time because we're fasting. This is our fasting window. Or would you be like, okay, sweetheart, when we finish this, we'll go and get some. You would treat this small child with kindness. And that's what I invite everyone to do with their bodies. So I love how if your body is like, hey, I'm hungry right now, you will feed it, because that's self-care.
Yeah, we could get into the topic of people parenting as well. I've seen that this is quite a struggle for a lot of the mums and dads I know, because the kids will often want sweets all the time, but maybe that's because they're not being allowed them. So there's sort of restrictions there. Would they be better off saying to their kids, eat as many sweets as you want and hope at a certain point that they come back to more healthy eating?
Sorry to interrupt, I get too excited, don't I? But with allowance and with choice, right? So there was a study that was done with so many like young children, like toddlers, and they were in this like hospital test for like a week, and they were given infinite amount of sweets, fish, potatoes, chocolate, basically every kind of food choice you could think of, and they were allowed to feed themselves. And what did they do first? Go to the sweet and chocolate table naturally, because most of the time they wouldn't be allowed it. But over the course of the week, each and every single toddler fed themselves a balanced, healthy diet, left to their own devices. So they need choice. So, I mean, I'm not a parent, but I've seen some parents give their children like a little plate with like random stuff. So like fruit, cheese, bread, like a different like array of choices, then they can pick and choose what they want. Whereas if sweets are never on there, of course they're going to want sweets all the time because they've never been given it as an option.
Yeah. Makes sense. So it's kind of like I've been at hotels with these buffets, and the first day you kind of eat a huge amount, the second day you eat a huge amount, and then by day 3 or 4 you kind of just settle to a fairly normal portion. Maybe still eating a bit more just because there's so much variety, but it does sort of settle down quite a lot, I've noticed. And you have this idea of a certain sort of set weight that people are, a set size that people are, that like if you try and restrict, you'll sort of naturally come back to a certain size.
That's it.
Yeah. So it's sort of almost like there's no point trying to do it anyway because you're going to swing back to this point.
Exactly. So each and every one of us has our own like blueprint, if you like, of a set point weight. The range varies from person to person, but it's average about £5. So within this £5 range on average, your body is happy within this weight. And when I say happy, it's thriving, your hormones are working correctly, everything's working as it should. Now, we can suppress our set point weight for a short period of time. Like if you imagine a bucket of water with a cork from the top of a wine bottle on the water, you pop the cork on the water, it's just bobbing around doing its thing, right? If it's a bit windy, the water might blow, the cork will bob along with the water. That's your set point weight. You can take your hand and press the cork down below the water for as long as you want to hold your hand down there for. That's restriction, that's dieting, you're losing weight, you're counting calories, you're restricting, you're making your weight go down using willpower and force. The second you have a bad day or you are confronted with freshly baked cookies, your hand's going to whip straight off that cork that you're holding down, and then the cork's going to pop up. But what it does, right, it doesn't pop up and starts to bob around straight away. It goes above the water first, because of the pressure that was holding it down, and then it will bob around again. So in the context of food and dieting and set point weight, you're pushing the cork down, suppressing your weight, you let go and think, fuck it, eat everything you've told yourself you haven't been able to eat for weeks and months. Then the weight shoots right up and you pile weight on very quickly. And then you think, oh shit, therefore I need to diet again because I can't trust myself to eat what I want. And you're constantly in that cycle. Whereas if we just get out of our own way, allow our instincts to run the show, like we trust our body when it wants to go for a pee, to the toilet, or if we're cold, we get a jacket on. We don't question that because society doesn't get money from that. But we question.
So just to be clear, you're saying if people restrict, then it goes down, of course, but then it goes up again a bit more afterwards.
Exactly. And over time.
I've been doing 3-day fasts fairly regularly for psychological reasons, not for weight loss reasons, over the last few years. And I think my return, and I always notice there's a return, and I'm not worried about that because I'm not trying to stay skinny or something. But I've noticed I think my set weight has sort of got up slowly over those years. And I wonder it's because of that restriction. It's like if I look at pictures of myself from 10 years ago, I mean, it's hard to know because age is also a factor here, right? Like most of the 43-year-old guys I know aren't skinny. Most of the 18-year-old boys I know are skinny, right? And most of the 65-year-old men I know are skinny again. You know, there does seem to be a sort of natural process through the aging process as well.
There is, and especially for women, you know, with hormones and menopause and all of that. But that happens gradually, and it's usually, in fact, it's not until we're 25 that we're fully formed with our bones, like everything's like fully formed. And so if you're interested in what your natural set point weight could potentially be, it's going to be an age over 25 where you weren't fucking about with your food and eating was just easy and you didn't really think about it. But then, of course, as you age, not massively, especially women start to change shape a little bit. So like after menopause, you'll get a little bit more fat around your tummy and perhaps less on your thighs, and it changes slightly, but not much. So yes, there is an age aspect to this, but I'm talking the maximum like one dress size, not like, you know, 2 or 3 dress sizes up. And in terms of your question, you're curious whether your restriction has raised your set point weight. The best way to gain weight over time and to increase your set point weight is to diet, because what happens is your body overcompensates. Your body only cares about survival. You know, Mark, the body lives in the present moment, in the now. It doesn't know past, like future. It doesn't have a time. It's now. And so if you're restricting, it's like, oh no, we're not doing this again, therefore I'll just hold on to more fat in order for survival to protect you. And so I would put money on it that if I had never dieted in my life, I would be naturally smaller than I am now. This is my set point weight. If I'd never gone on a diet, I would be smaller, because my set point weight has increased over time. That's shit, that's annoying, but the only way that I can stop myself from increasing my set point weight is to stop dieting.
All right.
Yeah, everyone stop dieting.
I mean, as you say, there's lots of evidence over time that it doesn't work, right? There's very few sort of long-term successes in kind of dieting. It doesn't.
95% of diets don't work long term. And then you get the question of, what about the 5%? I want to be in the 5%. Of course you want to be in the 5%. But here's the thing. With those people within the 5%, either are living in a restrictive eating disorder, meaning they're constantly repressing their set point weight. They're constantly holding that cork down. Hey, Mark, do you want to go out for pizza tonight? No, sorry, I'm, quote, being good or being careful.
Yeah.
So they're living in the restriction, which, if you ask me, is not a fun way to live.
It's just kind of a pain in the arse, isn't it? Yeah. Well, I've sort of looked at this and gone, well, I could probably have a 6-pack, but, you know, I'm relatively pretty healthy and I kind of enjoy my life and I like going out for food. And it's like, I'm not sure I'd want to be in that state the whole time of being super restrictive just for the sake of having a 6-pack. It seems a bit much. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's, I don't know. Then some days I look at guys and think, oh, I'd like that, you know, but I don't think I want it enough, if I'm being honest.
And if wanting it enough, it's like, are you willing to do the damaging, harmful behavior to yourself? Because dieting doesn't come without side effects, right? Number one, it raises your natural set point weight, so you actually get fatter over time. Number two, most people experience obsession with food, thinking more about food, like obsessing more about their bodies. Have I lost weight? So side effects are a real thing as well. All for what reason? To have a 6-pack, because why? To be a smaller dress size, because why? Because society is mirroring back to us that we're going to be happy and loved and sexualized and successful if we do that, but they get money from doing that. So it's all a load of BS. They need us to profit off our insecurities. If everyone woke up tomorrow literally loving themselves, can you imagine how different the world would be?
How do you do that? So often people say, you know, love your body. I don't like this body you're in. I find that a bit Cartesian, a bit bizarre, but like you're a sort of some inside driving it around. But anyway, people say love your body, right? And we all, that's great. Okay, this societal bullshit, you know, whether it's women or men. If anything, I'd say men's bodies are way less realistic, say in movies now.
Definitely.
Most of the female movie stars look like they've maybe had a diet, but the guys, they're on massive amounts of PEDs, they're on drugs, they're on steroids, and they've been cutting really heavily before a topless scene. Yeah. Like any mainstream actors had like 3 days of dehydration, for example. It's a crazy pressure. And this is, I've also seen some studies on this, like what women now regard as a desirable or normal body in a man has changed to the point where it's like, wow, even a guy like myself who's fairly strong, goes to the gym, pretty healthy, you know, I do yoga, I dance, I lift weights, and would be regarded as sort of not good enough by the average woman in terms of my body.
Which is sad, because I actually prefer your body type. That's my opinion.
Well, thank you, Victoria. I'll take that personally. But how do we do it? So man or woman, we go, I've got a certain conditioning that I'm going to be honest with you, you know, I get undressed, I'm in the bath last night, I've got a bit of a belly here, and you know, there's a little bit of disgust or shame, or not a huge amount, you know, not so much I'm crying over myself to sleep over it, but enough to go, yuck a little bit sometimes. And I think so many of us, if we're honest, we have that. So how specifically do we love our bodies?
Great question. And the women I work with are literally crying, like, no shit. I used to shower in the dark so I didn't have to see my body. I had so much shame over that. And so the question becomes, first and foremost, why do I feel the way I do? Where did I learn this shit? Because as you've said, it's all conditioning. And then the question becomes, am I willing to change my beliefs around my body and around food? And am I willing to have different beliefs to most of the population? Because
that doesn't work, Victoria. I'm going to interrupt. If I just say, I love my body for how it is, everyone else wants to have 6-pack or, you know, whatever, be skinny, whatever it is, I'm just going to decide that I'm fine.
Oh, no, it's not just it's a process. Right? So you first got to find out why you feel the way you do. You've then got to ask if you're willing to change your beliefs and then be different to what most people believe. So most people are talking about diets, blah, 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 blah. And then you start the process of unlearning by education and knowledge first and foremost, like why did diets happen to begin with, who's profiting, all of that knowledge. And then there's a lot of mirror work to do, a lot of inner child work to do, going back to childhood and finding the first time that you felt shame around and in your body. Like there's a lot of emotional release to do. And then acting, a lot of it is also needs to be outside of your comfort zone in order to grow, to challenge these new beliefs that you want to have for yourself, acting as if you believe that your body doesn't matter, because body love isn't loving the way you look in the mirror and thinking you're like the hottest thing that there ever was. That can be part of it, but body love is being in your body, appreciating your body for what you can experience through living in your body. And I do believe that we're like in a soul, blah, 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 in our bodies. I know that's probably not what you believe, but it's a case of like, why does it matter to me so much that I look a certain way?
Yeah. And kind of like, is it also, I kind of get feedback on this in a way, like, I know my wife loves me no matter kind of what shape I am, you know, like that's just consistent in that, you know. And I do challenge it in behaviors. Sometimes I'll get my belly out in a training, you know, and people, I've never done that in Russia a couple of times. People are really shocked, you know, because I've got a bit of a belly, and someone mentioned it. So I just got it out and was like, yeah, there's my belly, whatever, bugger off. People are like, I could never do that. You know, these women sort of dying, you know, look at it. Could this go too far, Victoria? Like you mentioned health at any size, for example. Mm-hmm. Now, the general principle of that makes sense to me. You know, I know athletes come in many shapes and sizes, you know, rugby players, for example, you get some big lads on the field who are pretty healthy, and different ethnic groups. We seem to have different body sizes, different shapes. I know BMI is a dodgy measure. But that being said, if I weighed 300 kilos, all right, what's that, 150 pounds for the Americans? Is that right? It's usually about half, isn't it?
I'm not very good at conversions.
Might be the other way. Okay, so that's the sort of probably like something like as big as a person could possibly be with my height. I wouldn't be healthy. I'd be at serious risk of heart attacks and various other kind of health problems, right? So can it be taken too far? Because I'm seeing a sort of hardcore left-wing politicized angle on this now, which is starting to look a little crazy. Like, is there a limit here?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, Regan Chastain is a 300-pound Iron Woman athlete.
Sure, so muscle weighs a lot. So there are, you know, so, I mean, she's just take weight as a measure here, right?
But she's a really, she calls her, she's reclaimed the word fat. She's a fat lady doing triathlons, right? And she's 300 pounds. And so that's like Regan Chastain, anyone that wants to look her up. So just to put that out there, but yes, in terms of health at every size, the key is in the name, health at every size, not any size, right? So if you think of the health at every size model, which is health is a big umbrella, and obviously physical, mental and emotional health comes under that. But what I see health is as eating vegetables to nourish yourself, moving your body in a way that feels good, getting enough sleep every night, talking through and processing your emotions, all of that. And so if you're doing all of those behaviors and you end up in a bigger body, then that is what is supposed to be happening for you. So many people who are morbidly obese, there's many layers to this, but there's also a fat gene as well. There's a book called The Secret Life of Fat that studied this, and they took morbidly obese people, not all of them, but some of them, no matter what they don't eat, no matter how much they exercise, they will not lose weight. So there is a genetic component to this, but in general, morbidly obese people, and I'm obese on the BMI scale, like just FYI, morbidly obese people, are they moving their body in a way that feels good? Are they listening to their hunger signals and stopping when they feel satisfied? So there's so many layers to this, but health is not a moral issue either. If someone is quite happy eating 50 steaks a week and not moving and not drinking water and living on sugary drinks, that's up to them. But if they don't feel great, because guess what? They're not going to feel great because your body wants to feel healthy. Their body will guide them to health when you remove the shame out of it, when you remove you need to lose weight so in terms of like blood sugar, heart disease, you can do healthful behaviors weight loss might be a side effect of that, probably will. But the second you switch your attention from weight loss as a goal, as a prescription, if you like, from the doctor, to healthy behaviors. One example, then I'll stop talking. One of my clients last week shared with me, she went to the doctors when we first started coaching, and that was 3 months ago. And the doctor advised, and this I am slating the medical industry here. The doctor advised she needs to go on a 600 calorie a day diet because she's in a large body to lose weight, to bring her blood pressure down. Right? She signs up with me, which is the absolute opposite. Like, I'm like food freedom.
That's pretty extreme. That's 600 calories a day. Most people aren't going to be able to stick to that for very long at all.
That's starvation. So so what she did in terms of behavior, she cut out alcohol and stopped drinking caffeine. And now her blood pressure is in the normal range, and it has been for weeks. She's actually gained a bit of weight, not lost weight. So health behavior is all in the behaviors, not the weight. We need to stop making weight.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very crude measure, right? It's a very, very crude measure. And I, again, would still say having weight, it is possible to have more fat than is healthy.
Well, it depends what you're classing as healthy.
Okay, so if I weighed 300 kilos and most of it was fat.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm not like a super muscly rugby player who's, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to be well.
In terms of what do you mean by not being well?
I'm going to be at increased risk of heart disease, for example.
Would that not be due to what you were eating as in the lifestyle, or would that be purely because of the adipose tissue on your body?
It'll be both of those things.
You see, so then imagine if you were this 300 kilogram guy who didn't do sports, imagine if you started to implement healthful behaviors, started to walk around the block once a day, started to add more vegetables in without deciding to cut out everything, and then obviously end up binging down a week down the line. Do you think you would then start to feel better and probably most likely lose fat over time without having that as the goal?
Mm-hmm. I do see what you're saying, and I do feel like it needs some pushback, because I'm seeing sort of ill health promoted as a sort of political issue. And I think that is potentially dangerous. And I'm with you on not, that there's a much bigger picture here.
There is. And also we need to remind ourselves that health isn't a moral issue, right? If someone is happy and doesn't, because there is some kind of effort, like it takes effort for me. I now make food choices from a place of nourishment and pleasure, meaning I won't drink a green shake that tastes like AIDS just because it's good for me.
Yes, right? Terrible, aren't they?
However, I will add in vegetables when I can. Like a perfect example, as in the UK last week, I went out for lunch with my mom. I ordered a cheese and onion chutney toasty, and it came with absolute zero salad, which is okay. But I actually said to the lady, please, can I have some kind of some leaves with this? And she bought me a plate of like green leaves. Now that's just, I could have obviously ate the toasty, but because I care about getting my veggies I'm adding shit in. Yeah.
No, I'd rather add things in than take things away, for starters. I remember a friend of mine was in, great shape, inverted commas. I said, "What do you eat, man?" He said, "No, it's about what I don't eat." And then listed all my favorite things. I was like, "Yeah, I'm good. I'm good, mate. Cheers."
Have you heard of what Zac Efron has shared recently?
No, what's their thing? We need to wrap up fairly soon.
Okay, so do you know Zac? You know Zac Efron, right?
Remind me who it is. The name's familiar.
Have you seen Baywatch with The Rock in it?
Oh yeah. I haven't seen it because I have taste, but I've heard of it.
It's an easy thing. So Zac Efron is the guy with The Rock in this film, and he is so shredded.
Yeah. I know who you mean. Yeah, good looking boy.
Yeah. So and again, I only saw this through Instagram yesterday. He shared publicly, in order to be in that shape, he fell into a deep depression because he was taking all these drugs to keep himself as like dehydrated as possible. He had like this something wrong with his liver because he wasn't eating enough. He was absolutely exhausted, and he said it's not worth, that body is not even healthy.
It's not worth it. It's not worth it. You might think he looks gorgeous, but you probably can't even get it up because his testosterone levels would be so low.
For me, it's way too lean. It's way too lean. That's my personal taste, but yeah.
Too skinny. All right. So it's sort of first steps for people, just really practical. Like, what would be a first step for kind of getting more in touch with oneself? What would be a sort of top practical tip for listeners?
Imagine your body as another person that you're building a loving relationship with. So therefore, it's easier to be kind to this loving person. It's easier to ask what their needs are. So you're building this relationship with your body. And when you start to listen and trust is a key word, your body will guide you to the healthiest version of you. But we just have to get our minds out the way, get the control out the way, and trust. And also exposure therapy and mirror work. So in terms of body image, go to the mirror naked. It will be triggering for many. And be okay with looking. Send love to the parts that you're judging in your head, and do that over time. Everything starts to shift gradually. There's a ton of stuff I can give you, but I know we need to wrap up. But if they go to my website, they can get a free taste test for my program. There's a mirror work thing that I exercise that I do with an audio, that they can start there, and then they'll see the work that I share and how it kind of works over time for them.
Great. What's your website, Victoria? I was about to ask you. So where do people go to get these resources or check you out a bit more?
VictoriaKleinsman.com, and then Instagram, Victoria Kleinsman Official, Facebook, Victoria Kleinsman.
You can see a picture of how chronically morbidly obese Victoria is. And
I am. My BMI is obese.
Is it really? I got that on the scales the other day. It said I'm obese. I was like, what are you fucking talking about? Like, I've got these clever scales that just seem to depress me.
Don't even. You and I have similar body types. If I was a man, I think I would have a similar body type to you. Like, we're built for circuit training, you know?
Yeah. All right, Victoria, this has been a pleasure and informative. Thank you so much. I think it'll be helpful to a lot of people. So thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.